Hey students, welcome back to the YouTube channel that is going to equip you with everything to succeed as a woman who is or will become menopausal. I'm Menopause Taylor, the gynecologist who is determined to teach you everything you deserve to know. Last week, we started a unit on the typical symptoms for different phases of your reproductive life. They include pre-menopause, peri-menopause, and post-menopause. In that first video of the unit, I gave you an overview of the various symptoms that are characteristic of each of those three phases. And we created this chart in the last tutorial. Today, we'll delve specifically into the pre-menopausal phase. So that means we'll focus on only the pre-menopause column. If we limit our chart to just that column, we get this. We also created a list of all the symptoms of excess and deficiency for each of our three reproductive hormones. We did so in the order of disappearance at the time of peri and postmenopause. So that's this one. We're going to be using this second chart again today as we discuss the symptoms that are characteristic of pre-menopause. Now, if you're wondering why in the world an education on menopause needs to include the pre-menopausal part of your life, it means that you really need to watch this video. And that's because if you understand why you have some of the symptoms typical of your pre-menopausal phase, it will help you understand the symptoms typical of your peri and post-menopausal phases. So gather the young pre-menopausal women in your life together and invite them to watch this video with you so that they benefit while they're still pre-menopausal. You won't find this material as a standalone chapter in my book. I refer to it whenever it's pertinent, but to get this lesson on pre-menopause in isolation, you're going to need to stay here. Alrighty, since we'll be addressing pre-menopause today, we'll center our discussion around the very thing that makes pre-menopause, your menstrual cycles. This goofy Play-Doh graph that you've seen dozens of times before will have new meaning for you by the end of this video. First, let's just talk a bit about this single menstrual cycle depicted here on this graph. Notice that there are three hormones depicted here as different strands. You've got the estrogen strand here in pink. The progesterone is the multicolored strand, and testosterone is the blue strand. Oxytocin is not depicted on this graph, but we will still address it. And the fact that it is not on the graph is actually quite apropos, and I'll tell you why later. Now, the first thing I want you to notice is the fact that these three hormones rise and fall during the course of a single 28-day menstrual cycle, this being a 28-day menstrual cycle. So these hormones essentially create an up and down pattern. So you really have a combination of a merry-go-round with some ups and downs. It's a lot like this merry-go-round. The merry-go-round itself just goes round and round, while the horses go up and down. And you're stuck on the merry-go-round for years. And that merry-go-round, my dears, is precisely why you have certain symptoms that are typical at certain times in your cycle. It is also the reason that learning about these cyclic symptoms helps you understand peri- and post-menopause. So let's just follow each up and down hormone through a typical 28-day cycle in order to examine the symptomatic effects of each. And if we're going to be discussing menstrual cycles, the first thing to establish is how you number the days of your cycle. Well, since the only universally recognizable event of a menstrual cycle is the first day of bleeding, we designate the first day of bleeding as day 1. It doesn't matter whether the bleeding on day 1 is light or heavy, pink or red. All that matters is that day 1 is the first day you see any sign of bleeding. After that, you just number each day consecutively until you start bleeding again, and that designates the beginning of the next cycle. A normal cycle length is 28 days, but of course, women are not robots. So cycle lengths vary from one woman to the next, and they can also vary from one cycle to the next. However, most women have a typical, predictable cycle length for the most of their cycles, regardless of the actual number of days per cycle. And it is the interplay between estrogen and progesterone that creates all of your cycles throughout your entire pre-menopausal life. Testosterone plays a minor role. So we will now address the roles of these hormones individually. Okay, we're going to start with the queen of all hormones, estrogen. That's the pink line. Okay, estrogen is the engine of the whole cycle. And although your estrogen rises and falls throughout your menstrual cycles, you have to remember that it is never, ever, ever zero. Before you become post-menopausal, you have loads of estrogen at all times. There are just differences in the levels of it at different times during your cycle. So pre-menopausal women do not typically have any of the symptoms of estrogen deficiency that post-menopausal women have. Instead, they have some differences in how they feel at various times during their cycle. So let's walk through a typical 28-day menstrual cycle and designate how estrogen changes as you progress through your cycle. So you can see here that from day 1 to 3, estrogen starts to rise from its lowest pre-menopausal level, which was just before your period started. Days 1 to 3 are when you are having your monthly bleed, which we tend to call our period. This means that while you are having your monthly period and your estrogen is on the low side, you may not feel your best. But it is highly unlikely that you would have symptoms of estrogen deficiency, and that's because you are not estrogen deficient at any time during premenopause. By day 4, which is about right here, your estrogen is rising steadily and rapidly. And that's when you're likely to feel your very best in here. It reaches the peak at about day 12. And day 12 is just about 2 days before you ovulate. So you feel grand for about 8 days here, all because you have high estrogen. But then estrogen starts to drop again, but not to its lowest level. So you continue to feel just fine. Ovulation occurs at mid-cycle in a 28-day cycle, so that's going to be about day 14. And you can see that your estrogen dips just after ovulation for just a couple of days. And this short time frame of a dip is not enough to disrupt your sensation of feeling good. And by day 16, it's on the rise again. with moderate levels until right before your next period. And it's the time frame immediately before your next period when estrogen is at its lowest pre-menopausal level. And that's when you are likely to feel your worst. But that's not only due to estrogen. Progesterone contributes too. But without doubt, estrogen is definitely your most important hormone. Okay, now let's shift our focus to the multicolored line, which represents progesterone. Notice that progesterone is fairly low during the entire first half of your cycle. Some depictions show progesterone as merely a low flat line throughout the entire first half of your cycle. Others show some slight variation, like what you see here. But regardless of whether progesterone is a flat line or a bit variable, it certainly doesn't contribute much to your symptoms in the first half of your cycle. And then, bam! On day 14, it starts to take off. Remember, progesterone is all about the baby. The very word progesterone means hormone in support of pregnancy. Pro means in support of. Gest means gestation, which is pregnancy. Own means hormone. The very reason progesterone rises on day 14 is because you ovulate on day 14. And if ovulation results in fertilization of an egg, progesterone is there to support the pregnancy. So progesterone is the significant hormone in the second half of your cycle. Estrogen is there, but it is overshadowed greatly by progesterone. Progesterone does not make most women feel good. Quite the opposite. It negates some of the good feelings produced by estrogen. And notice when progesterone peaks. It peaks about 3 days before your period starts. And that peaking progesterone brings with it all sorts of yucky symptoms and syndromes that we'll be addressing in upcoming videos. Well, the next hormone of interest is testosterone. That's here in blue. Now, testosterone is a bit boring in terms of its behavior during menstrual cycles. Notice that it's just there, kind of at a very low level throughout your cycle. And then, ping! On day 12, just before you ovulate, it spurts just in time to make you want to have sex. And it maintains that surge for just about 4 days. So testosterone rises on day 12, and you ovulate on day 14, and testosterone falls on day 16. Mother Nature uses this testosterone surge to induce you to have sex just in time to get pregnant. The hormone that you do not see on this graph is oxytocin. It's not missing from the graph because it's missing from your premenopausal body. Quite the opposite. Oxytocin is persistently plentiful throughout your entire premenopausal life. It's sky high all the time. So if we added oxytocin to our graph using this white ribbon, it would be way up here. It would loom over all these other hormones at all times. And it would make you loving toward people, events, and things at all times. So as you can see, these hormones essentially follow a script in terms of when they rise and fall. As a result, they govern every everything in your menstrual life. They even govern a lot of things in your personal, social, and professional life. Now, because estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are rising and falling at different times during your cycle, you have different symptoms at different times during your cycle. Those varying symptoms are entirely due to the hormonal changes that are taking place from day to day. There are some symptoms that are just normal, and there are others that are abnormal. In the next few videos, I'll present some symptoms that are characteristic at different times during your menstrual cycles. And some are completely normal but uncomfortable. Others are common, but just because they're common does not always mean that they're normal. In other words, they are significant enough to cause significant disruptions in your life or in your health. And some symptoms are downright abnormal. So I'm going to be presenting them all to you. Your summary for today is simple. The days of your menstrual cycle are numbered consecutively. Day 1 is the day you begin a period. Throughout your cycle, the fluctuating hormones cause you to experience different symptoms at different times during your cycle. You have changing symptoms throughout your menstrual cycle that are directly due to the fluctuating hormones that create your menstrual cycle in the first place. And in the next few videos, you'll learn that the merry-go-round isn't always so merry. Sometimes it's wary, or scary, or hairy, or contrary. So, that's it for today, my dears. If you have any quandaries as to why you have certain symptoms at certain times during your cycle, schedule a consultation with me at menopaustailor.me so that I can tailor everything specifically to you and your cycles. This is not the kind of stuff that you can compare with other women. You are unique. So you need to address it in accordance with the one and only you and in the context of your situation. But subscribing to my channel and newsletter are things that anybody can do. So you can do that right now. Likewise, following me on social media is something that anybody can do. So I'll see you there at any time. And I'll see you for the next video tutorial in 1 week. I'll teach you all about pre-menopausal mid-cycle pain. Bye for now.